Here is a silence between stars that most species never learn to hear. It is not the absence of sound, for space carries no sound at all, but something deeper, something older. It is the silence of time itself, stretching across distances so vast that light takes generations to cross them. In that silence, civilizations rise, flourish, and crumble to dust, their stories scattered across the cosmic winds like ash from a dying fire. I have lived long enough to hear that silence, to feel it press against my thoughts in the quiet hours when sleep refuses to come. I am Thalverin of the Ascendancy, or I was before that title came to mean nothing at all. For 12,000 cycles I served the conclave of eternal spheres, watching over a dominion of 300 billion souls spread across 9,000 worlds. We were ancient when the light from Earth's sun first touched the edge of our territory. We were powerful when humanity's ancestors were still learning to shape stone into tools. And now we are dying. I remember when we first detected them, the humans. It was considered barely worth mentioning in the Conclave's morning briefings. A primitive species on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy. They had just begun sending radio signals into space, crude broadcasts of entertainment and conflict that spoke of a species perpetually at war with itself. Our analysts studied them briefly, then filed their reports with a dismissive note. No strategic value. Recommend observation status only. Probability of self-extinction within 500 cycles, 73%. We were so certain of ourselves then, so confident in our understanding of how the universe worked, how civilizations rose and fell, how power was measured and maintained. We had seen 1,000 species emerge from their birth worlds, struggle briefly against the dark, and then fade away, consumed by war, by plague, by the simple entropy of existence. Humanity, we believed, would be no different. How terribly wrong we were. The transport shuddered as it dropped out of fold space, and I pressed my palm against the cold viewport, watching the stars realign themselves into unfamiliar patterns. We were far from home now, farther than I had ever traveled in all my centuries of service. The coordinates had been given to us by a dying communications officer, transmitted in her final moments before the Shrike swarm consumed her station. She had spoken of humans, of a place called Sol, of a promise made in secret by diplomats our government had publicly disavowed. "They will help," she had gasped, her voice breaking apart with static and pain. "They said if we ever need it, they would come." I had not believed her. The humans had been expelled from Conclave space 40 cycles ago, their ambassador recalled after an incident that our leaders had used as justification for severing all ties. They were dangerous, we had been told, unpredictable. Their short lifespans made them reckless, their violent history made them untrustworthy. Better to keep them contained in their small corner of the galaxy, where their chaos could not infect our perfect order. But our perfect order was burning now. The Shrikes had seen to that. "Valverin," the voice came from behind me, weak and wavering. I turned to find Counselor Yethmari leaning against the bulkhead, her normally iridescent scales dulled to a sickly gray. She had been wounded in the evacuation of Sphere Tertius, and the medical supplies we had managed to salvage were running dangerously low. Have we arrived?" "We have crossed into their territory," I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Sol system, the third planet, Earth, their homeworld." She closed her eyes,
and I saw something I had never expected to see on the face of a conclave counselor. Relief. Pure, desperate relief. Then there is still hope. Hope. The word felt foreign in my mouth, a concept I had almost forgotten in the endless nightmare of the past 30 cycles. 30 cycles since the Shrikes had emerged from the void between galaxies. 30 cycles since our fleets had first engaged them, confident in our technological superiority. 30 cycles of defeat after defeat after defeat, watching everything we had built across millennia crumble like sand before an inexorable tide. Our weapons could not touch them. Our shields could not stop them. Our strategies, refined over thousands of cycles of warfare, were useless against an enemy that did not think, did not fear, did not negotiate. The Shrikes simply consumed. World after world, fleet after fleet, billion after billion of lives extinguished without purpose or meaning. They were not conquerors, they were not invaders, they were simply erasure. The universe's way of reminding us that even the mightiest civilizations were nothing more than temporary arrangements of matter, destined to return to the void from which they came. I had watched Sphere Primus fall, the jewel of our civilization, home to 40 billion souls, reduced to a cloud of debris in less than a standard day. I had listened to the final transmissions from Sphere Septimus, the screams and prayers of millions as the Shrike swarm descended upon them. I had held the hand of Grand Admiral Kethros as he died, his last words a whispered apology for leading our fleets to slaughter. And now I was here, in the territory of the very species we had shunned and dismissed, carrying the desperate hopes of the few million survivors scattered across what remained of our once great dominion. The viewport flickered, and a new image appeared. A small station orbiting the fourth planet of the Sol system, a rust-colored world the humans called Mars. The station was unimpressive by conclave standards, a functional collection of habitation modules and docking arms without the elegant spires and crystalline domes that characterized our own orbital installations. It looked almost primitive, constructed with efficiency rather than beauty.
Unidentified vessel. The voice that crackled through our communication system was calm, almost conversational. You have entered Sol Protectorate space. Please identify yourself and state your purpose.
I keyed the response channel, suddenly aware of how exhausted I sounded. This is Ambassador Thalvarin of the Conclave of Eternal Spheres, aboard the transport Whisper of Endings. We request emergency asylum and an audience with your leadership. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. When the voice returned, there was something different in its tone. Not hostility, but a kind of careful attention that made me inexplicably uneasy. Ambassador Thalvarin, we weren't expecting representatives from the conclave. Please hold position while we verify your credentials and prepare a reception. Medical facilities will be standing by if required. Medical facilities. Such a simple offer, but it struck me with unexpected force. After cycles of running, of watching our wounded die for lack of supplies, of making impossible choices about who would receive treatment and who would be left to fade, the casual offer of medical care felt almost obscene in its generosity. "We have wounded," I said, and my voice cracked despite my efforts to control it. "Many wounded. Our medical supplies were exhausted 3 cycles ago." Another pause, shorter this time. "Understood, Ambassador. We are dispatching a medical shuttle to your coordinates. ETA 12 minutes. Please lower your defensive screens to allow docking." Lower our defensive screens.
to a species we had expelled from our space, to a species we had called dangerous, unpredictable, unworthy of trust. I thought of Counselor Yethmari, of the 17 other survivors huddled in the transport's cramped compartments, of the infected wound on young Kethvin's arm that would kill him within days without proper treatment.
"Screens lowering," I said.
The medical shuttle that arrived was as unadorned as the station it came from, a blocky, utilitarian craft painted in colors that seemed designed for visibility rather than aesthetics. It docked with mechanical precision, and moments later the airlock cycled open to reveal a team of humans in crisp medical uniforms. They were smaller than I expected. The records had shown me images, of course, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with a kind of quiet efficiency that I found difficult to read, their expressions neutral but not cold. The one in front, a female with dark skin and closely cropped hair, carried a medical scanner in one hand and extended the other toward me in what I recognized as a human greeting gesture.
"Ambassador Thalvarin, I'm Dr. Amara Okonkwo. My team is here to provide immediate medical assistance to your people. May we begin?"
I stared at her hand for a moment, then slowly reached out to take it. Her grip was firm, warmer than I expected, and she met my eyes with a directness that I found both unsettling and oddly comforting. "Yes," I said, "please. We have a young one, Kethvin. His arm is infected. Without treatment, he will not survive the cycle."
Dr. Okonkwo nodded, already moving past me into the transport. "Kowalski, Davidson, with me. The rest of you, start triage. Anyone critical gets moved to the shuttle immediately." She glanced back at me. "Ambassador, I'll need you to provide medical histories if you can. Anything about your species' physiology that might affect treatment."
"I will tell you everything," I said, and for the first time in 30 cycles, I meant it. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. The human medical team worked with a focused intensity that left me genuinely impressed, adapting their treatments to our biology with a speed that suggested they had been studying our species far more closely than we had ever realized. Kethvin's infection was cleaned and treated. Counselor Yethmari's wounds were properly dressed for the first time since her injury.
Even old Vethkon, who we had been certain would not survive the journey, was stabilized and given medication that eased his labored breathing. When the immediate medical crisis had been addressed, Dr. Okonkwo found me sitting alone in the transport's small observation bay, staring out at the stars.
"You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, settling into the seat beside me.
"I have not slept properly in 30 cycles," I admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them, the shrikes, the worlds they have consumed, the faces of those I could not save."
She was quiet for a moment. "The shrikes. We've heard rumors, reports from the edges of explored space, but nothing concrete." Her voice remained calm, but I sensed the question beneath it.
"They are not rumors," I said. "They are extinction made manifest. An enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be fought, cannot be stopped. We tried everything, every weapon in our arsenal, every strategy our greatest minds could devise. We have been fighting them for 30 cycles, and in that time they have destroyed 7 of our 9 core worlds. 300 billion souls reduced to less than 50 million refugees scattered across the void."
I heard her sharp intake of breath, but when I looked at her, her expression remained controlled. Only her eyes betrayed her, widening slightly, then narrowing with something that looked almost like calculation.
300 billion, she repeated quietly.
"The conclave and eternal spheres is no more," I said, and speaking the words aloud made them finally, irrevocably real.
We ruled 9,000 worlds. We maintained peace and order across a quadrant of the galaxy for 12,000 cycles. And now I am here, begging for help from a species we dismissed as primitives, a species we expelled from our space because we feared what you might become."
Dr. Okonkwo was silent for a long moment. Then, softly, "Why did you fear us, Ambassador?"
The question caught me off guard. I had expected anger, perhaps, accusations, demands for apology. Instead, she simply asked, with what seemed like genuine curiosity.
"Because you would not stop growing," I said finally. "Because every time we looked away, you had advanced further than our projections predicted. Because your history was written in blood and fire, and yet you never destroyed yourselves. You came so close, so many times, but always you pulled back from the brink, adapted, survived. It was unsettling. No species we had ever encountered had that capacity for self-destruction paired with such relentless resilience."
"So you decided we were dangerous."
The Conclave believed that if you were allowed to expand unchecked, you would eventually challenge our dominion. It seemed safer to contain you, to limit your access to fold space technology, to ensure that by the time you became a true threat, we would be prepared.
Dr. Okonkwo smiled, but it was a strange smile. Not mocking, not bitter, but something closer to sad. "And how did that work out?"
I looked away. We were fools, arrogant fools who believed we understood the universe. The Shrikes proved us wrong. They proved that all our power, all our technology, all our centuries of accumulated wisdom meant nothing against an enemy we could not comprehend. I paused, forcing myself to meet her eyes. And now I am here, asking for the help of the very species we treated as children. If you turn us away, I will not blame you. We deserve nothing from you."
She studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she stood, smoothing the front of her medical uniform. "Get some rest, Ambassador. You'll be meeting with our leadership soon. They're going to want to hear everything about these Shrikes."
"And then?"
"And then we'll see." She paused at the doorway. "You should know something, Ambassador. 40 years ago, when your conclave expelled us from your space, it was one of the best things that ever happened to humanity. It forced us to stop waiting for acceptance, forced us to build our own path, forced us to become something we might never have become if we'd stayed comfortable under your shadow." She smiled again, that same strange, sad smile. "Maybe you did us a favor."
And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the stars and my thoughts.
I did not sleep that night. Instead, I watched through the viewport as our transport was guided toward the human station, studying the traffic around it with increasing unease. There were more ships than I had expected, far more. Cargo vessels, mining craft, what appeared to be construction drones swarming around the skeleton of a massive structure that was only partially complete. The activity was ceaseless, coordinated, purposeful in a way I could not quite understand. When morning came, or what passed for morning in the artificial light cycles of space, I was escorted to a meeting room aboard the station. It was as utilitarian as everything else I had seen of human construction, but clean and comfortable. A window looked out on the rust-colored surface of Mars, where I could see more activity, domes, vehicles, what appeared to be vast solar collection arrays stretching across the barren landscape.
The humans who entered the room were not what I expected.
There were 3 of them. The first was an older male with gray hair and weathered features, wearing a simple uniform without obvious rank insignia.
The second was a younger female with sharp eyes and a data tablet in her hands. The third was a male of middle years, dark-haired and calm-featured, who moved to stand by the window rather than taking a seat.
Ambassador Thalvrin, the older male said, extending his hand in that same greeting gesture Dr. Okonkwo had used. I'm Admiral James Chen, Solar Defense Command. This is Director Silva of Strategic Intelligence, and that's Dr. Marcus Webb from the Theoretical Threats Division.
I took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip despite his age. Thank you for receiving us, Admiral. I know we have no right to expect hospitality from humanity after how the Conclave treated your people. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Let's not worry about the past right now, Ambassador. From what Dr. Okonkwo tells me, you've got much bigger problems than old diplomatic grievances. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Tell us about these shrikes. I sat, suddenly aware of how tired I was, how much I had been carrying for so long. Where should I begin? The beginning is usually a good place, Director Silva said. Her voice was cool, professional, but not unkind. When did you first encounter them? What do they look like? How do they attack?
And so I told them. Everything. The first contact, when a Conclave exploration vessel stumbled upon a Shrike hive cluster at the edge of known space. The initial attempts at communication met with nothing but silence and violence. The first fleet engagement, which we had expected to be a simple extermination of a minor threat, and which had ended with the complete destruction of 37 warships and the consumption of their crews.
I told them about the shrikes themselves, vast organic constructs that moved through space without visible propulsion, their surfaces covered in writhing tendrils that could tear through our strongest hull plating like paper. They ranged in size from small hunter forms no larger than a human shuttle to hive ships that dwarfed our largest dreadnoughts. They did not use weapons as we understood them. Instead, they simply engulfed their targets, dissolving metal and flesh alike into raw material that was absorbed into their ever-growing mass. I told them about our defeats, the fall of the outer spheres, the evacuation of the core worlds, the increasingly desperate attempts to find a weakness, any weakness, in an enemy that seemed to have none. I told them about the billions who had died, the ancient knowledge that had been lost, the civilization that had taken 12,000 cycles to build and had been destroyed in 30. Through it all, the three humans listened in silence. They did not interrupt. They did not ask for clarification. They simply absorbed everything I said with expressions of focused attention that revealed nothing of their thoughts. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse from speaking, Admiral Chen leaned back in his chair and exchanged a long look with Director Silva.
That's quite a threat assessment, he said finally.
It is not an assessment, I replied. It is a death sentence for my people, and eventually for yours as well. The shrikes do not stop. They do not negotiate. They simply consume and expand. If they are not stopped, if anyone can stop them, they will eventually reach every corner of the galaxy, including Sol.
How long? Dr. Webb spoke for the first time, still standing by the window. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. How long until they reach our territory? I closed my eyes, performing the calculation I had run 1,000 times. At their current rate of expansion, 18 to 24 months, perhaps less if they find a more direct route through the space the Conclave once controlled. And your military? Director Silva asked. What remains of your defensive capabilities? We have perhaps 300 warships still operational, scattered across the refugee fleets. Most are damaged. All are low on supplies. Our command structure has collapsed. The majority of our admirals and generals were killed in the defense of the core worlds. We have soldiers, but no one to lead them. Weapons, but not enough to make a difference.
Admiral Chen nodded slowly. So you're asking us for help, not just asylum, but active military assistance against an enemy that destroyed a civilization 100 times larger than ours.
Yes, I met his eyes, forcing myself not to look away. I am asking you to fight alongside us against an enemy that has never been defeated. I am asking you to risk everything your species has built to defend a people who treated you as inferiors. I am asking for a miracle, Admiral, because miracles are all we have left.
The room was silent for a long moment. I could hear the soft hum of the station's environmental systems, the distant vibration of ships docking and departing. I waited for the refusal I knew must be coming. The humans had every reason to turn us away, to seal their borders, fortify their defenses, and let the Shrikes exhaust themselves, consuming what remained of the conclave before facing whatever was left.
Instead, Admiral Chen did something I did not expect. He smiled.
"Ambassador," he said, "I think there are some things you should see." What followed was a journey that would fundamentally alter my understanding of humanity and of my own species' place in the universe.
Admiral Chen led me through the station to a command center I had not known existed. It was buried deep in the structure's core, protected by layers of armor and shielding that seemed excessive for a species we had considered technologically inferior. Inside, dozens of humans worked at holographic displays showing data streams I could barely comprehend. "This is the Solar Strategic Monitoring Center," Chen explained as we walked. "It's where we keep track of everything happening in our sphere of influence, and quite a bit beyond it." He stopped before a massive display that dominated one wall. With a gesture, he activated it, and I found myself looking at a map of the galaxy. But not the galaxy as I knew it. This map showed our former territories, yes, but it also showed things I had never seen before. Trade routes I had not known existed, military installations in regions we had believed uninhabited, a web of connections and resources that spanned far beyond the small corner of space we had assigned to humanity.
"You've been watching us," I said slowly.
"We've been watching everyone," Director Silva said, appearing at my side. "After your conclave expelled us, we realized that we couldn't count on anyone else to protect our interests. So we started building our own intelligence network, quietly, carefully. We learned a lot about the galaxy, including things the conclave never shared with us."
"The Shrikes," I said. "You knew about them before we told you."
We knew something was happening on the edges of explored space. We detected the gravitic disturbances from the destruction of your outer spheres nearly a year ago. We've been tracking the Shrike expansion ever since.
I stared at the display, watching the red markers that represented Shrike territory expand in a simulated time-lapse. Why didn't you warn us?
"Would you have listened?" Admiral Chen asked. "The Conclave made it very clear that they didn't want anything to do with humanity. We tried to send warnings through back channels, but your government refused to acknowledge our communications. By the time your leaders realized the threat was real, it was already too late."
The words hit me like a physical blow. We had been so arrogant, so certain of our own superiority that we had ignored warnings that might have saved billions of lives. The weight of that failure settled on my shoulders, and for a moment I could not speak.
"I'm not telling you this to assign blame," Chen said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "What's done is done. The question now is what we do next."
"And what do you intend to do?" I asked. Chen looked at Director Silva, who nodded. Then he turned back to the display and entered a new command. The map shifted, zooming in on human-controlled space, and I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat.
Ships. Thousands of ships. They were everywhere, in orbit around Earth and Mars, clustered around stations in the asteroid belt, deployed in formations throughout the outer system. They ranged in size from small patrol craft to massive capital ships that dwarfed anything I had seen in the Conclave fleet. And they were all active, all moving, all coordinating in patterns of obvious military significance.
What is this? I breathed.
This is the Solar Defense Fleet, Admiral Chen said. What you're seeing is approximately 12% of our total military capability. The rest is currently deployed across our colonial territories or undergoing final construction.
I turned to stare at him, unable to process what I was hearing. This is impossible. The Conclave's monitoring showed that you had a few hundred vessels at most. Basic patrol craft, nothing approaching this scale.
The Conclave's monitoring showed what we wanted it to show. Director Silva's voice was calm, almost casual. We learned very early that our survival depended on not being seen as a threat, so we built quietly, carefully. Underground facilities on asteroids and moons, factory ships disguised as mining operations, research stations hidden in the outer reaches of our system. She paused. Your conclave was so certain we were primitives that they never looked beyond the obvious.
I thought of all the times I had reviewed intelligence reports on humanity, the assessments that described them as technologically limited, militarily insignificant, a species barely worth monitoring. We had believed what we wanted to believe, that we were the masters of the galaxy, that no younger species could possibly challenge our dominance.
How long? I asked. How long have you been preparing?
Since the day your conclave expelled us, Admiral Chen said. 40 years. We knew that sooner or later something would threaten our existence. We just didn't know what form that threat would take. He turned to face me directly. But we always knew we would face it alone. We learned that lesson the hard way, Ambassador. The galaxy doesn't protect the weak. It consumes them.
And the Shrikes?
We've been analyzing the data from your battles, the samples we've recovered from the edges of the destruction zones. We have theories about how they might be vulnerable. Nothing confirmed yet, but we're working on it. He paused. What we need now is more information, detailed tactical data from your engagements, technical specifications for your weapons, what worked, what didn't, and most importantly, we need time.
Time? I repeated. Time for what?
Time to finish our preparations. Time to coordinate with our colonies. Time to adapt our strategies to face an enemy we've never fought before. Admiral Chen's expression was grave. You said the Shrikes would reach our territory in 18 to 24 months. We need at least 12 of those months to be fully ready.
And in the meantime?
In the meantime, we slow them down, harass their flanks, disrupt their expansion, buy ourselves and your survivors the time we need.
I looked at the display again, at the vast fleet that humanity had built in secret while we dismissed them as irrelevant. I thought of the Shrike swarms, the endless tide of destruction that had consumed everything my people had built, and I felt something I had not felt in 30 cycles, the faintest glimmer of hope.
You actually believe you can defeat them, I said.
Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. I believe that humanity has never faced a challenge it couldn't eventually overcome. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars that killed hundreds of millions of our own kind. We've poisoned our own planet and pulled it back from the brink.
We've split the atom and harnessed the power of stars." He paused. "The Shrikes are powerful, but they're not the first extinction-level threat we've faced. And if history has taught us anything, it's that humanity is very, very difficult to kill."
The weeks that followed were a revelation.
I was given quarters aboard the station, comfortable, if Spartan, and assigned a liaison officer named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park. She was young by human standards, but carried herself with the quiet confidence I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her species. She answered my questions patiently, guided me through the unfamiliar layout of human facilities, and never once showed any resentment for the way the Conclave had treated her people.
"It's ancient history," she said when I asked about it. "My grandparents' generation lived through the expulsion. My parents grew up hearing stories about it. But for me," she shrugged, "it's just something that happened. The universe is full of things that aren't fair. You deal with them and move on."
This attitude was something I encountered repeatedly among the humans I met. They remembered the past. They had extensive historical archives that documented everything the Conclave had done to them, but they did not seem consumed by anger or resentment. Instead, there was a pragmatic acceptance that struck me as almost unsettling. They had been wronged, but they had chosen to focus on building rather than on grievance. I watched them work, and I began to understand what had made the Conclave fear them. Humans never stopped. They slept less than any species I had ever encountered, and even when they rested, their minds seemed to continue processing, planning, preparing. They communicated constantly, sharing information through networks that spanned their entire civilization. When one group discovered something useful, it was instantly transmitted to all the others, incorporated into shared knowledge bases that anyone could access. And they adapted. This was what truly amazed me. When the first data from our Shrike engagements was translated and distributed to human researchers, they immediately began developing new theories and weapons concepts. Within days, prototypes were being tested. Within weeks, production lines were being reconfigured to manufacture new equipment. The pace of innovation was staggering, faster than anything the Conclave had ever achieved, even at the height of our power. "How do you do it?" I asked Dr. Webb one afternoon, watching as he reviewed data from a series of weapons tests. "How do you change so quickly? The Conclave took decades to develop new technologies. You seem to do it in days." He looked up from his display, considering the question. "Necessity, mostly. We've always lived on the edge of extinction. Predators, climate, disease, each other. There was always something trying to kill us. The species that couldn't adapt fast enough died out. We are the descendants of the ones who learned to adapt fast."
"But surely there must be more to it than instinct."
"There is." He set down his tablet. "We compete, not just against external threats, but against each other. Ideas fight for survival just like organisms do. The best ones spread, the worst ones die out. It's chaotic and inefficient in many ways, but it produces innovation at a rate that more orderly societies can't match." I thought of the Conclave, where new ideas had to be approved by councils and committees, where innovation was carefully managed to avoid disrupting the existing order. We had believed that our measured approach was superior, more stable, more sustainable. But stability had not saved us from the Shrikes.
"You disapprove of our methods," Dr. Webb observed.
"I am reevaluating my assumptions," I admitted. The Conclave believed that order and stability were the highest values, that chaos led only to destruction. But watching you, I begin to wonder if we had it backwards. Perhaps chaos is not the enemy of survival. Perhaps it is the engine of it." Dr. Webb smiled slightly.
That's very philosophical, Ambassador, but the truth is simpler than that. We do what we have to do to survive. We've always done what we have to do. When survival requires order, we create order. When it requires chaos, we embrace chaos. We're not committed to any ideology except existence itself.
It was a chilling statement, delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone that I almost missed its significance. Humanity was not bound by principle or tradition. They would become whatever they needed to become to survive. And that flexibility, that willingness to transform themselves, was perhaps the most terrifying thing about them.
3 months passed. The refugee fleets from the Conclave began to arrive, guided by coordinates we transmitted through secured channels. Each wave brought more survivors, more soldiers, more scientists, more desperate souls who had escaped the Shrike advance by the narrowest of margins. The humans accepted them all, directing them to temporary housing on Mars and in the asteroid colonies, providing food and medical care without apparent hesitation.
I spent much of my time helping to coordinate the integration, working alongside Lieutenant Commander Park and a growing team of human and Conclave personnel. It was difficult work. My people were traumatized, often suspicious, struggling to accept help from a species they had been taught to view as inferior. But gradually, carefully, bridges began to form.
I was in a refugee processing center on Mars when the news came.
Ambassador! Lieutenant Commander Park burst through the door, her face pale. You need to see this. Command center, now! I followed her through the corridors at a near run, my heart's pounding with dread. When we reached the command center, I found Admiral Chen and his staff clustered around a holographic display that showed a region of space I recognized, the approach vector to Conclave territory.
"What has happened?" I demanded.
They've accelerated, Chen said, his voice flat. The Shrikes. They've changed course and increased their expansion rate. Instead of 18 months, we're now looking at 7. Maybe less.
7 months? The number echoed in my mind, impossibly short. How? Why? We think they detected the refugee transmissions. The signals our people sent to guide the survivor fleets to Sol. They're homing in on the densest concentration of life in the region. Director Silva's expression was grim. Us. I stared at the display, watching the red markers of Shrike territory expand toward the blue dot that represented humanity's home. We had led them here. In trying to save our people, we had drawn the attention of the destroyers to the one species that might have had a chance against them.
This is my fault, I whispered. We should never have come here. We've doomed you.
Ambassador. Admiral Chen's voice was sharp, and I looked up to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. This changes our timeline, not our strategy. We always knew this fight was coming. We've just got less time to prepare for it than we hoped.
Less time? You said you needed 12 months. You have less than 7. You can't possibly.
Watch us.
The words were spoken quietly, but they carried a weight that silenced me. I looked at the faces around the room. Human faces, calm and focused despite the death sentence that had just been pronounced on their civilization. None of them showed panic. None of them showed despair. They were already moving, already adapting, already working to meet a challenge that would have broken any species I had ever known.
What do you need from us? I asked.
Chen turned back to the display. Everything you have. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of tactical data from your engagements. We're going to need all of it. He paused. And something else. Your people need to stop thinking of us as allies of convenience. When the Shrikes arrive, there can't be any hesitation, any divided loyalties. We fight as one or we die as individuals. Can you make that happen? I thought of the cultural barriers, the centuries of suspicion and prejudice that still lingered among my people. It would not be easy, but nothing about survival had ever been easy.
I will make it happen, I said.
The next 5 months were the most intense period of my long life. Humanity mobilized in a way I would not have believed possible. Every colony, every station, every mining outpost was converted to war production. Civilians were trained in emergency procedures, evacuation protocols, basic combat techniques. Ships were built at a pace that defied all conventional understanding of manufacturing capability.
And they made us part of it. I watched conclave engineers working alongside human technicians to adapt our weapons for human vessels. I saw conclave tactical officers sharing battle data with human commanders, teaching them the lessons we had learned in blood. I witnessed something I had never thought possible. 2 species, former adversaries, becoming one fighting force. It was not easy. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, moments when old prejudices threatened to tear apart what we were building. But always, somehow, we found a way forward. The humans had a phrase for it. We'll figure it out. It seemed to be their answer to every impossible challenge. They did not promise success. They simply refused to accept failure.
I was present for the final briefing, 2 days before the Shrikes were projected to reach the outer edges of Sol system.
Admiral Chen stood at the center of the command center, surrounded by a fleet that now numbered over 40,000 vessels, human and conclave, working together under unified command. The display showed the approaching Shrike swarm, a mass of red markers so dense that it seemed to blot out the stars themselves.
In approximately 47 hours, Chen said, his voice carried to every ship in the fleet, the largest hostile force ever to enter our solar system will arrive at the edge of human space. The enemy cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be intimidated. It has destroyed a civilization that existed for 12,000 years and consumed 300 billion lives. He paused. But today, it will meet something it has never faced before. Today, it will meet humanity. I listened to the murmurs of the human crews, the whispered affirmations and prayers. They knew the odds. They knew that many of them would not survive the coming battle. And yet, there was no fear in their voices, no despair. Only a terrible, quiet determination that I found almost painful to witness.
We have spent 40 years preparing for a moment we hoped would never come, building weapons in secret, training soldiers in silence, waiting for the day when we would face extinction and choose to fight rather than surrender. Chen's voice hardened. That day has come, and we are ready.
The display shifted, showing a battle plan of staggering complexity. Multiple fleet groups coordinating across light minutes of space. Weapon systems I had never seen before. Things the humans had developed in secret, deploying for the first time against an enemy that had never been defeated. It was ambitious. It was audacious. And looking at it, I began to believe it might actually work.
To our conclave allies, Chen continued, I want to say this. We know what you have lost. We know the pain you carry. But today, you are not refugees. Today, you are warriors. Today, we stand together against the void, and we will teach it to fear us.
The cheer that went up from the combined fleet was overwhelming. Human and conclave voices mingled together, unified in defiance.
And standing in the command center, watching the species I had once dismissed as primitives prepare to face the apocalypse with unwavering courage, I felt something break inside me. Not break, I realized, transform. Everything I had believed about the universe, about my own people, about the nature of survival, it was all changing, reforging itself into something new. And at the center of that transformation was humanity, small, fragile, short-lived humanity, who refused to accept that extinction was inevitable.
The Shrikes arrived on schedule.
I watched from the command center of the flagship as they emerged from fold space at the edge of the system. Billions of them, a tide of darkness that blotted out the stars. They were exactly as I remembered from the fall of the conclave. Vast, terrible, inexorable. The sensor readings were almost uninterpretable, the sheer mass of the swarm overwhelming our detection systems.
Contact confirmed, a human officer announced. Multiple emergence points across the outer system. Lead elements proceeding toward inner planets at point 3C.
Time to engagement range: 8 hours, 47 minutes.
Admiral Chen nodded calmly, as if discussing a routine training exercise. All fleet groups, execute Phase 1. Let's see if our new toys work.
The first wave of weapons deployed was unlike anything the Conclave had ever conceived. Humanity had developed a new type of warhead designed specifically for the Shrikes. It didn't try to destroy them through kinetic impact or energy release. Our people had tried that and failed. Instead, it targeted the biological processes that allowed the Shrikes to absorb and process matter, a kind of artificial virus engineered to infiltrate Shrike tissue and disrupt their molecular conversion systems. I watched as thousands of missiles launched from concealed platforms scattered throughout the outer system. They raced toward the approaching swarm, their payloads armed and ready. When they struck, the effect was visible even at this distance, ripples of disruption spreading through the leading edge of the swarm, Shrike forms convulsing and breaking apart as their internal systems failed. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to hope.
But the Shrikes were not so easily defeated. Even as the first wave of weapons took its toll, the swarm was adapting. I watched in horror as the disrupted Shrikes were simply absorbed by those behind them, their corrupted tissue purged and recycled. The swarm paused, contracted slightly, and then resumed its advance, seemingly unaffected by the attack that had destroyed millions of its members.
Adaptation time, 37 seconds, Director Silva said, her voice flat. Faster than our projections. They learn from each attack, I said. Whatever weapon you use against them, they develop immunity almost immediately. The Conclave discovered this too late. Every offensive strategy becomes useless after its first deployment. Admiral Chen turned to look at me, and I expected to see despair in his eyes. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what we were counting on." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." "Ambassador, the weapon we just used wasn't meant to destroy them. It was meant to make them adapt." He turned back to the display. "Phase 2. All fleet groups begin deployment."
What followed was unlike any battle I had ever witnessed.
Instead of concentrating their forces, the human fleets dispersed across the entire solar system. Instead of confronting the Shrike swarm directly, they harassed its flanks, hitting and running, forcing it to adapt again and again to different threat vectors. And with each adaptation, the swarm became more specialized, developing defenses against specific attack types while potentially weakening its overall resilience. You're trying to exhaust them, I realized. Not physically, evolutionarily. You're forcing them to evolve in directions that make them less effective overall.
The Shrike's greatest strength is their adaptability, Dr. Webb explained, appearing beside me with his ever-present data tablet. But adaptation isn't free. Every new defense they develop requires resources, energy, biological complexity. If we can force them to adapt faster than they can sustain, we can create vulnerabilities where none existed before.
This is insane. You can't win an evolutionary arms race against a species that has consumed hundreds of worlds. No, Admiral Chen agreed. We can't. But we don't have to win. We just have to survive long enough for Plan C to become operational.
Plan C.
He smiled, and for the first time I saw something behind his controlled exterior, something fierce and proud and utterly terrifying. You'll see.
The battle raged for 6 days.
6 days of constant engagement, constant adaptation, constant loss. I watched human and conclave ships die by the thousands, their crews sacrificing themselves to buy minutes, hours, precious time that I still did not fully understand. The Shrike swarm pushed deeper into the solar system, consuming the outer planet's moons, absorbing the mass of Jupiter's atmosphere, growing larger even as it was forced to adapt and re-adapt to the endless variety of human weapons. And all the while, I sensed something building beneath the chaos of battle, a tension, a gathering of forces, a preparation for something that no one would explain to me, despite my repeated questions.
On the 7th day, the Shrike swarm reached the asteroid belt.
On the 8th day, Admiral Chen ordered all fleet groups to disengage and retreat toward the inner system.
"We're giving up?" I demanded, following him through the corridors of the flagship. "After everything we've sacrificed?"
We're not giving up, Ambassador. We're getting out of the way.
Before I could ask what he meant, we entered the main command center, and I saw what had been hidden from me for all these months.
The display showed the inner solar system in unprecedented detail, and there, hanging in space between Mars and the asteroid belt, was something that should not have existed. Something that defied every law of physics I thought I understood. It was a structure, if that word could even apply. A network of energy conduits and focusing arrays that stretched across millions of kilometers of space, connected by forces that my sensors could not identify. At its center, where Mars should have been, there was only a blazing point of light that grew brighter with each passing second.
What is that? I whispered.
That, Admiral Chen said quietly, is 40 years of preparation, 40 years of hidden construction, 40 years of the greatest scientific project humanity has ever undertaken. He paused. We call it the Judgment Array.
I watched, unable to speak, as the point of light at the center of the structure intensified. The readings on the display were impossible, energy levels that exceeded the output of entire stars, focused and controlled by technology that seemed to bend the fundamental laws of reality.
When your conclave expelled us, Chen continued, we knew that we would eventually face a threat we could not defeat through conventional means, so we started working on something unconventional. Something that would require more energy than any civilization had ever harnessed. Something that could reach across light years and strike at enemies before they could threaten us.
You weaponized your star, I realized. The energy readings. You're channeling the output of your sun.
Not just channeling, focusing, directing. The Judgment Array can project a beam of directed stellar energy anywhere within a radius of 100 light-years. It took us 4 decades to build it, and the last 8 days to charge it to full capacity." His voice hardened. "The Shrikes forced us to use it earlier than we planned, but they also gave us a target we couldn't miss." On the display, the Shrike swarm continued its advance, apparently unaware of the doom that was gathering to meet it. Billions of individual organisms, driven by a hunger that had consumed civilizations, moving inexorably toward the heart of human space.
"Judgment array at full charge," a technician announced. "Ready to fire on your command, Admiral."
Chen looked at me, a long, steady look that seemed to contain multitudes. "This is for your 300 billion, Ambassador. For all the worlds the Shrikes have consumed, for every species that will never have to face what you faced." He turned to the technician. "Fire."
What happened next will haunt my memories for as long as I live.
The point of light at the center of the array expanded into a beam of pure white fire that stretched across the void toward the Shrike swarm. It moved at the speed of light, inevitable, unstoppable, beautiful in its terrible perfection. And where it touched the swarm, the Shrikes simply ceased to exist.
Not destroyed, not consumed, erased, unmade at the atomic level, their matter converted directly into energy that fed back into the beam, making it stronger with each microsecond of contact. The swarm tried to adapt. I saw it on the sensors, the desperate attempts to evolve defenses against an attack that was fundamentally different from anything they had ever faced. But there was no adaptation possible against the direct output of a star. No biological process could withstand temperatures measured in millions of degrees. No shield could block energy that exceeded the combined output of their entire consumed mass.
For 37 minutes, the Judgment Array burned, its beam sweeping across the void in patterns calculated to ensure complete elimination. The Shrikes died in their billions, then their trillions, their death screams, if they could scream, lost in the roar of stellar fire.
And when it was over, when the array finally powered down and the display showed empty space where the swarm had been, I found that I was weeping. Not from joy, not from relief, but from a kind of awe so profound that it bordered on religious terror. Humanity had looked upon extinction and had answered with the fury of stars. The aftermath was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The celebrations, when they came, were muted. Too many had died, human and conclave alike, for pure triumph. But beneath the grief, there was something else, a recognition that the universe had fundamentally changed, that a species dismissed as primitives, constrained and condescended to by ancient powers, had risen to meet a challenge that no other civilization had survived. I stood on an observation deck of the flagship, watching the distant glow of the Judgment Array as it cooled, and Admiral Chen found me there. "You knew," I said without turning. "All along you knew you could defeat them. But you let us believe that the battle was in doubt." "We didn't know," Chen replied, moving to stand beside me. "The array had never been tested at full power. There were 1,000 ways it could have failed." He paused. "But we believed. We believed that 40 years of preparation, 40 years of sacrifice and secrecy had to mean something. We believed that humanity had not come this far just to die." "And the conclave? All our suffering, all our losses, was that just a test? A way to validate your theories about the Shrikes before risking your own people?" I expected him to deny it, to offer platitudes about alliance and shared purpose. Instead, he was silent for a long moment. "The universe is not kind, Ambassador. You know that as well as anyone.
When your conclave expelled us, we learned that we could not count on anyone else for our survival. We had to become strong enough to face any threat alone." He turned to look at me. "But that doesn't mean we wanted you to suffer. It doesn't mean we took any pleasure in watching your worlds burn. The moment you came to us for help, you became our people, and we protect our people."
Even people who treated you as inferiors, who feared and despised you?
"Especially them." Chen's voice softened. "Ambassador, every species has the capacity for growth, for change. Your conclave made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but that doesn't mean your people are beyond redemption. You came here seeking help, knowing we had every reason to turn you away. That took courage, that showed character, and it earned you a place among us."
I thought of the conclave as it had been, arrogant, insular, certain of its own superiority. I thought of what we had become, refugees, suppliants, survivors. And I thought of what we might become now, learning from a species we had so badly underestimated.
What happens next? I asked.
"Now we rebuild. Both of us, together. Your people have knowledge and experience that we lack. We have resources and territory that you need. It won't be easy. Building a shared future never is. But I think we can create something better than either of us had before."
A new conclave?
Something different, something based on cooperation rather than hierarchy, on mutual respect rather than dominance. He smiled. Call it the next step in evolution. I looked out at the stars, the same stars I had watched for thousands of cycles, now seeming somehow different, brighter, more full of possibility.
"There is a concept among my people," I said slowly, "a belief that the universe tests each species to determine their worthiness, that only those who face the void and survive have earned the right to exist."
"And what does the test require?"
Different things for different species. For the conclave, it was the test of time. We proved our worth through endurance, through building a civilization that lasted millennia. I paused. But we failed the test the Shrikes represented. The test of adaptation, of resilience, of refusing to accept defeat even when all hope seemed lost.
"And humanity?"
I turned to face him, this small, fragile creature whose species had looked upon annihilation and answered with fire.
Humanity passed a test I did not know existed, I said. You faced the void, and you judged it, and found it wanting. That is something I never imagined possible.
Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "We have a saying on Earth, Ambassador. Something we learned through centuries of struggle and survival." He looked out at the stars, and I saw reflected in his eyes the same fire that had burned the Shrikes from existence. The void is not empty. It's full of things waiting to consume us. Darkness that wants to swallow every light, every hope, every dream. And the only way to survive is to burn brighter than the darkness.
"To become the light that judges the void and finds it wanting."
I thought of all the species the Shrikes had consumed, all the civilizations that had risen and fallen without ever being noticed, all the potential, all the possibility snuffed out by an uncaring universe that seemed to select for only the most ruthless, the most adaptable, the most willing to do whatever was necessary to survive.
And I thought of humanity. Small, fragile, short-lived, but burning with a light that refused to be extinguished.
The conclave believed that power came from dominion, I said, from controlling resources and territory and lesser species. But you have shown us something different. Power comes from something deeper, from refusing to accept defeat, from adaptation and resilience and the willingness to sacrifice everything for survival.
Power comes from choice, Chen said. The choice to fight when fighting seems hopeless. The choice to hope when hope seems foolish. The choice to extend a hand to someone who was once your enemy because you recognize that we're all in this together. All of us, every species in the galaxy, facing a universe that would happily watch us all burn. He turned to face me fully, and in his eyes I saw the weight of everything humanity had endured. The wars, the plagues, and near extinctions, the centuries of clawing their way up from the mud to the stars. It was all there, the pain and the triumph, the grief and the joy, the terrible beauty of a species that had been forged in fire and refused to break.
"The void came for us," he said quietly. "It sent its judgment in the form of the shrikes, and it expected us to fall like all the others. But it forgot something important. It forgot that we learned to judge long before we learned to fear, that we looked upon ourselves, at our capacity for destruction, at the darkness in our own hearts, and we chose to be better. We judged ourselves, Ambassador, and having survived that judgment, nothing the universe can send against us will ever be enough."
I felt something shift inside me, a final, irrevocable change in my understanding of reality. The Conclave had spent millennia believing they were the pinnacle of creation, the natural rulers of the galaxy. But standing beside this human, looking out at a future that would be shaped by his species rather than mine, I understood that we had been wrong about everything.
Power was not measured in cycles of existence or number of worlds controlled. It was measured in the ability to face the void, to stare into the darkness that waited at the edge of everything and refuse to look away. Humanity had faced that void. They had judged it with the fury of their own star, and in doing so, they had earned something that no other species I had ever encountered possessed, the right to define what the future would become. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With the power you have demonstrated, you could rule the galaxy. You could become what the Conclave was, or worse."
Chen shook his head. "That's not who we are. We didn't build the judgment array to conquer. We built it to protect. There's a difference." He smiled slightly. "Besides, ruling the galaxy sounds exhausting. We've got enough trouble managing ourselves."
Then what do you want?
"What we've always wanted. To survive, to grow, to explore, to become something more than we are." His smile faded into something more serious. "And to make sure that no one else has to face what you faced. No more species wiped out by threats they couldn't stop. No more civilizations consumed by the void while more powerful neighbors looked away." I stared at him, trying to comprehend what he was proposing. "You want to protect the entire galaxy?"
We want to give the galaxy a chance, the same chance we had to grow, to develop, to make our own mistakes and learn from them. He shrugged. "It's ambitious, I know, maybe impossible, but that's never stopped us before." I thought of all the species out there, young civilizations just beginning their journey to the stars, ancient powers set in their ways, and everything in between. I thought of the threats that lurked in the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for their opportunity to strike. And I thought of humanity, standing at the threshold of a new era, choosing to extend a hand rather than a fist.
"You are not what we expected," I said finally. "Not what any of us expected."
Good. Chen's eyes glinted with something that might have been humor. "We prefer to exceed expectations." Later, alone in my quarters, I composed my final report to what remained of the conclave leadership. It took me hours to find the right words, to express what I had witnessed and what it meant for our people's future. In the end, I wrote this.
For 12,000 cycles, we believed ourselves to be the guardians of civilization, the masters of the galaxy, the final arbiters of which species would rise and which would fall. We believed that our longevity, our technology, our carefully maintained order made us superior to the younger races who burned so briefly in the cosmic dark.
We were wrong. The humans have shown us something we never understood. Survival is not about endurance alone. It is not about building walls so high that nothing can threaten you. It is about adaptation, resilience, the willingness to change, to grow, to become something new in the face of extinction. The void came for us, and we fell. We fell because we could not change, because our perfect order had no room for the chaos of true survival, because we had forgotten that the universe does not care about our traditions or our pride. But the void came for humanity too, and they did not fall. They turned the heart of their star into a weapon and burned the darkness from the sky. They did what we never could. They judged the void and found it wanting. We must learn from them. We must become more than what we were. Not their subjects, but their partners. Not their inferiors, but their students. The future belongs to those who can adapt, and if we cannot learn to change, we will fade into history, while humanity and those who follow their example carry the torch of civilization forward.
From the void came judgment. Earth delivered it, and in doing so they have shown us what we must become if we wish to survive.
This is my final report. Let it serve as a beginning rather than an end. I transmitted the message and then returned to the observation deck, where I could watch the stars wheel past in their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, among those distant points of light, new threats were gathering. New challenges were waiting to test whoever was brave enough to face them. But for the first time in 30 cycles, I was not afraid.
Because I had seen what humanity could do. I had witnessed a species that refused to accept extinction, that turned its greatest weakness, its short lives, its chaos, its relentless drive to change and adapt, into its greatest strength. And I knew that whatever the universe sent against us, we would face it together.
The void had come for Earth, and Earth had answered. Now, standing at the dawn of a new age, I understood what Admiral Chen had meant. The void was not empty. It was full of darkness, waiting to consume every light that dared to shine. But humanity had chosen to burn brighter. They had become the light that judged the darkness, and in doing so, they had shown us all what it truly meant to survive. The stars seemed brighter now, fuller of promise. And somewhere in the depths of my ancient heart, I felt something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the desperate hope of refugees fleeing destruction, but the confident hope of someone who knows that the future, however challenging, can be faced, that the darkness can be overcome, that survival is not just possible, but inevitable, as long as there are those willing to stand against the night. Humanity had taught me that, and I would never forget.
This is the truth I carry with me now, the truth I will share with every survivor of the conclave, every species we encounter in the vast reaches of space. Do not fear the void. Do not let the darkness convince you that resistance is futile, that extinction is inevitable, that the universe cares nothing for your struggles.
The universe may not care, but humanity does.
And from the void came judgment, a judgment delivered not in malice or conquest, but in defense of life itself. A judgment rendered in stellar fire, aimed not at us, but at the darkness that would have consumed us all. Earth delivered it.
And in doing so, they saved us.
All of us.
Forever.